Let's get some guidance then from Alfie Stirling, Head of Economics at the New Economics Foundation. Good afternoon, Alfie.
Hi there, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Should we pay more responsibility to an OBR prediction than maybe Mark Carney at the Bank of England or any other fortune teller?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because it's probably important to note that they're not actually predicting a particular outcome. So what they've done is they've set out a scenario.
Stress testing alternative scenarios, as I said in the intro, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But when we talk about, 2% of GDP, 4% of GDP, these numbers, they're not actually predictions. They're almost saying it's an exercise. We know that a no-deal Brexit is going to cause frictions and tensions and reduce the size of the economy. Let's say it has this magnitude of effect. Now let's look at what that will do and what we can do to stop it. So actually the Bank of England did the same thing 6 months ago where they set out different scenarios. The IMF did it recently, the International Monetary Fund.
I believe the OBR's actually based its figures on the IMF figures, yeah.
Exactly. So they're not actually coming up with a new kind of, prediction of what Brexit will do. They're just saying, let's now start to take this seriously.
I think the one thing we can agree is not near enough all the predictions from such said organisations, and I take the point that in some cases they're showing the same data, have the same fairly gloomy outlook.
They do, yeah. So it's clear that, in terms of all these predictions and all the economists that are working on the modelling and the forecasting that underpins them, there's a consensus, broadly speaking, that a no-deal Brexit will shrink or constrain economic activity through kind of two ways. So one is that, by hitting trade and by hitting the amount of migration that's going to come into the UK, the potential of the country to produce goods and services will basically shrink. And then the other one is perhaps even more severe and worrying, which is that because of all the uncertainty that will be created, people will just stop spending money. And part of that will lead to sterling crashing. Our currency will lose its value, and that means actually things become more expensive for us again.
It's worth saying it took quite a knock after the last TV debate with Hunt and Boris Johnson both advocating for a no-deal Brexit. We went down to, 124 the day before yesterday, pound sterling.
Yeah, that's right, and it moves around quite a bit, and particularly at the moment, given the amount of heightened uncertainty. But we do know that in a no-deal Brexit scenario, it will fall considerably, quite a bit more, and that will squeeze living standards because the pound in our pocket will be worth less when we try and buy something. The
question, I suppose, that's in the forefront of my mind, Alfie, is why doesn't anybody appear to be listening? Why are our politicians, our political leaders, not reacting to this? Why was it that when Jeremy Hunt said on the, I think it was the ITV debate, about sheep farmers facing 40% tariffs overnight if we go on to WTO rules, that question wasn't even responded to. Boris talked over him, the audience didn't respond, the host didn't respond. A major issue for sheep farmers. Okay, maybe most people don't care about sheep farmers, but, they're there, they've got a business, and overnight their business is going to become extremely difficult, and no one seems to have a word to reassure them with.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know if I'm best placed to answer.
Alfie, I rather thought you would be.
I personally like to ask that same question, if I'm honest, of politicians. I mean, I think probably a simple answer right now in terms of the Conservative Party leadership debate might be that the particular electorate that Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are talking to right now, much of them actually already assume Brexit is not going to be a bad thing. And so they're talking to a group of people where those sorts of messages, answering those sorts of questions, actually isn't going to get them votes. So that might be an answer.
You see, I shouldn't prejudge the political leanings of my guests, because I was assuming New Economics Foundation, and they're going to take perhaps a fairly conservative view of things, maybe a positive view of Brexit. So I'm interested even more in what you have to say, Alfie. Can I chuck something else into the mix that I really genuinely don't understand what it might mean, and I don't think most listeners will even be aware of this. And this is that, and it's going back to the last recession. And of course, the way we got ourselves out of the recession in part was through quantitative easing. And there was a story around, I think, last night saying the Bank of England's balance sheet is likely to halve when the time comes to reverse quantitative easing. So it's going to go from something like £600 billion today to 275 to 375 billion pounds. What does this? I didn't know that quantitative easing was even going to be reversed. What does this mean to ordinary people like me and Kevin?
So this is the whole kind of thicket of a conversation of what quantitative easing is doing. But effectively, this is an idea where if the bank can't cut interest rates, which is the rate at which it lets other banks borrow from it, and this affects what we all pay in mortgage values on our credit cards. So normally when we have a recession, the Bank of England will cut its interest rate, and that means all of us get lower interest rates and it maintains spending in the economy. But the problem is interest rates right now are at zero, so you can't cut them any further. So their alternative kind of experiment, if you like, was to use quantitative easing to intervene in the market directly to try and lower other interest rates. And so the idea still is that it's going to reduce people's mortgage costs. It's going to allow people to borrow at cheaper rates, and that's the idea. Is that it basically frees up spare cash for people to borrow and spend. Now you're right that we're kind of at the end of the tether there. So actually, there's a limit to how much quantitative easing we can do as well. And right now, if you combine quantitative easing in terms of how much space there is to do more of that, and combine that with how much we can cut interest rates, we can probably only respond to a recession that is worth about 1% of GDP.
Right.
Very shallow.
So that's kind of what I was assuming, that when we've got the OBR talking up the possibility, or at least looking at a recession scenario, what we must do, what you have to do, Alfie, and your colleagues at the New Economics Foundation and other bodies similar, is come up with, and Bank of England has to do, his government will have to come up with ways of getting ourselves out of recession. And what you're saying, if I've got this right, is because quantitative easing, the tether, as you said, we're coming to the end of that, we're not necessarily going to be able to fall back on the same tools we used last time to get ourselves out of the brown and smelly stuff. Right. Absolutely.
And this is the really key point. And actually it links back, in another way, back to this OBR report, because the point of this OBR report was actually to focus on government debt. So their stress testing was, yes, it was about the economy, but what they were really interested in understanding was, well, how much will this increase government debt by?
Right.
And that links to your answer to your question, because what will happen if you can't cut interest rates and can't do more quantitative easing is government will have to step in. It will have to borrow more, it will have to spend more to boost the economy and to get us out of recession. But there's a really important point here, which is that the OBR actually has things the wrong way around. So they talk about the risks to the government's balance sheet. Okay, they say there is a risk from Brexit of the balance sheet going up. Now, that's a bit like saying the risk of winter is that the radiators might come on. But of course, putting the radiator on is about responding to the cold. And actually, borrowing more in the event of a no deal is about getting us out of recession. And so in some ways we have to try and get a slightly more sophisticated conversation around when we talk about risks to the government. Actually, the government should be assuming risk. It should be taking on risk, borrowing on behalf of society to get us out of recession.
So the government has to borrow?
In a no-deal situation, you would absolutely expect the government to borrow more temporarily to keep pounds in people's pockets, keep the economy moving, keep people in jobs.
Okay, just going back to the OBR, it's all right, because you're making me feel nervous and scared, if I'm absolutely honest. So the next thing really was about the length of time we might anticipate any kind of recession lasting. The OBR, I mean, one of the scenarios that they're talking about is that we could be in trouble probably into the mid-2020s. Is that something you would concur with?
Yeah, I mean, So recessions can last a long time, and different bits of the recession can last a long time.
Yes.
So we normally think about recessions as being, this hit to GDP, and that might not last that long. It might be like a year or two. But what tends to drag on is the lingering side effect that it has on living standards, basically. So since 2008, the lingering side effect was actually in wages. We haven't seen a recovery in wages still 10 years on, and that's quite new. Historically, we used to think it was unemployment that didn't recover very quickly. We've had the opposite this time around. So I would say that it'll all depend on the depth of the recession. It'll depend on how we respond. So, for example, if government doesn't borrow, that will actually make it last much, much longer.
Interesting.
But if we do all the right things, the key thing will be to try and, rebound the amount of activity immediately in the economy, buying and selling. But then in the long run, trying to make sure we don't have this sustained impact on wages in the long run as well. And that could drag on into 2020 if particularly government doesn't do enough.